A couple of quick announcements before I introduce our speaker today and we get to our program. Number one, a couple of thank yous to the Irvine Foundation. This event today is part of our James Irvine Foundation briefing series. So the foundation helped support this event, and the foundation also helped support this particular survey. So thank you to the James Irvine Foundation. Also, when you came in, you should have received a copy of a couple pages in the report. The full report is on the website, ppic.org, and there's also a way you can go in and look at your own crosstabs, look at trend lines, a lot of different ways to look at the survey online at ppic.org. At the bottom of the page, there's a little button that says interactive tools for the survey. So. Also, the slides from today's presentation will also be on the website. When you came in, you also should have received an evaluation form, and it would be much appreciated if you could fill that out and drop it off the table on your way out and tell us how you think we did. And a couple of events we have coming up. Sounds like there's a speaker outside. April 10th, which is coming up, we have an event on water. It'll be a half-day event at the Sacramento Convention Center. It'll be about how to pay for our water system in California. There's 3 panel discussions from about 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And on April 21st, we're going to have a panel discussion about prison realignment and it's pretty. All right, well, tell me if you can hear me. On April 21st, the realignment discussion will be with Senate President Darrell Steinberg, with Assemblywoman Melissa Melendez, who's the Vice Chair of the Public Safety Committee, and with Matt Cate, who's the Executive Director of the California State Association of Counties. So that should be a very interesting discussion about that major policy. One announcement, this is being taped for broadcast, so if you want to, yes, can you hear me? Okay, how's that? I hate competing with Amazing Grace. I'll never win that one. So this is being taped for broadcast, so if you want to avoid an embarrassing moment, you should silence your cell phones. And we'll have a presentation here, and then we'll have open up for Q&A from the audience, and I'll come up and help moderate that. But first, I'm going to introduce our presenter today, is Jui Shrestha. Jui is a research associate at PPIC, and she's the project manager for this particular survey. So please welcome Jui.
So thank you, Dave, and thank you all for joining us today. And even without this singing, I would like to first check if everyone at the back can hear me. Thank you. And if I trail off in the middle of the presentation, do wave a hand or raise your hand to let me know that you can no longer hear me, and I'll speak into the microphone or speak louder. So before talking about the findings of our most recent survey, I would like to provide some background about the PPIC statewide surveys. Our mission is to provide timely, relevant, nonpartisan data on important political, social, and economic opinions, and by doing so, we seek to inform and improve the state policy-making process, raise awareness about these issues, and encourage discussions about them. We seek to provide a voice for all Californians in important policy debates, and in this regard, since first starting interviews in 1998, we have reached over 293,000 Californians in 140 general, issue, and regional surveys. So the Californians and their government is our general survey series funded by the James Irvine Foundation. It covers a wide range of state and national issues, and this particular survey in the series looks at state-level issues, including the state and local tax system, views on the current drought, water bond, and high-speed rail. And at the national level, we look at approval ratings of elected officials, healthcare reform, immigration reform, and attitudes towards abortion and legalizing marijuana. Interviews for this survey, both on landline and cell phones, were conducted from March 11th to 18th, and we reached 1,702 Californians in this period, among whom we consider 1,091 to be likely voters. The margin of error for all adults is 3.6%, and that for likely voters is 4.5%. So starting with the issues covered at the state government level, we looked at approval ratings of elected officials, perceptions of taxes, the current drought, support for the water bond and high-speed rail, and the upcoming gubernatorial primary. Today, Governor Brown's rating is at 49%, which is slightly lower than the record high reached this January. However, it is similar to what we found last March. The state legislature's approval is at 36%, and just like with Governor Brown, it is also slightly lower than what we found in January, but similar to their approval last March. We asked Californians to name the most important issue facing the state today and find that jobs and the economy are still the most frequently mentioned, but the share saying that jobs and the economy is the most important issue for the state has declined over the last 2 years. And we found that the share mentioning water or drought related issues has grown 13 points since last March, with 15% mentioning issues related to the water or the drought. And looking at overall mood and the economic outlook in the state, 45% say that things in general are going in the right direction, and 46% expect good times financially in the next 12 months. So with the deadline for filing state and federal taxes coming up very soon, how do Californians view the state and local tax system? About half say that it is fair, and the other half think that it is unfair, with 3% saying that it is very fair, 47% saying it is moderately fair, 32% not too fair, and 15% not at all fair. And while half of Californians say that the tax system is fair, we find that 6 in 10 adults think that they pay more in taxes than they should. The share saying that they pay much more or somewhat more in taxes than they should is at its highest today. Before the passage of the Proposition 30 tax measure in January 2012, 46% said that they paid more in taxes. Slightly higher shares said they paid more in taxes in January 2011 and 2010, but as I said, the share saying they pay more in taxes is highest in this survey. We also found that, interestingly, the upper income residents are the most likely to say that they pay more in taxes compared to those earning less. In addition to general perceptions about the state and local tax system, the survey also looked at support for raising 4 types of taxes. There is strong support for raising the state income tax on the wealthy, with a strong majority of Democrats and independents in favor of this proposal, while Republicans are opposed. Half of Californians also support raising the state taxes paid by California corporations. And once again, Democrats and independents favor this proposal, while Republicans are opposed. When it comes to extending the state sales tax to services that are not currently taxed, about 6 in 10 Californians say that they are opposed to this proposal. But if the proposal also involves lowering the overall sales tax rate while extending it to services that are not currently taxed, then Californians are divided, with 44% saying they would favor this proposal and 43% saying that they would oppose it. So a major topic in the state at the moment is the current drought that we are in, and we also saw earlier in the presentation that the share of Californians naming water and drought as the most important issue for the state has grown exponentially since the last year. So we looked at a series of questions to gauge views on area water supply in the state, and we find that a record high 55% of Californians say that the supply of water in their area is a big problem today. In December 2009, when there was another drought in the state, 44% held this view, and it had declined to 30% by March 2012. And majorities across the state's region say that their area water supply is a big problem, with the Central Valley residents being the most likely to say that the supply of water is a big problem. When asked about whether they had taken any steps to reduce water use because of the drought, nearly all Californians say that they have done a lot or a little to reduce water use. 57% of adults say that they have done a lot to reduce water use, and 35% say that they have done a little. And once again, the Central Valley residents are the most likely to say that they have done a lot to reduce water use because of the drought. So in this type of a climate, how do Californians stand on the $11.1 billion water bond that's currently on the November ballot? We found that 50% of likely voters would vote yes, and 32% would vote no on the current $11.1 billion bond. Support was slightly lower last March, and in 2012 it was similar to what we find today. As probably all of you already know, there are several alternate proposals to this water bond being considered in the legislature to replace the $11.1 billion bond measure. So we asked those respondents who said that they would vote no on the current water bond how they would vote if the bond amount was lower, and we find that overall support increases to 59%. Next, about 44% of likely voters say that it is very important that voters pass the water bond measure. The share considering it very important to pass the water bond measure was lower both in 2012 and in 2011. Another large-scale project that is currently getting much attention in the state is the high-speed rail system. When we read a brief description of this project and the $68 billion cost that would be spread over 20 years, a slim majority of adults at 53% and a lower share of likely voters support building the high-speed rail system in California. And once again, just as with the water bond, we asked those who oppose building the high-speed rail system how they would feel if the amount for the project costs were lower, and we find that support for building it increases by 15 points. Next, in the upcoming primary, Governor Brown has the support of 47% of the primary likely voters, but 36% are still unsure about who they would vote for in the gubernatorial primary. The Republican contender, Tim Donnelly, has the support of 10% of likely voters, and the other two Republicans that we asked about in the survey, Neil Kashkari and Andrew Blount, each have the support of 2% of likely voters, but 3% still say that they would vote for someone else. With 3 months left before the primary elections, 37% say that they are following news about the gubernatorial candidates either very or fairly closely. And attention has definitely grown since last December and this January, but the share saying that they were following news about the candidates either very or fairly closely was much higher, with over half of likely voters saying that they were following news in earlier primaries in March 2006 and March 2010 when we were this close to the election. Moving on to federal issues, we looked at approval ratings of federal elected officials, opinions on income inequality, and the government's role in various social issues such as abortion, marijuana, and gun control. We also looked at attitudes towards healthcare reform and immigration reform. So President Obama's approval among Californians is at 52% today, which is similar to what we found in January, and is also very close to the record lows reached in December 2013 and September 2011. The US Congress continues to get low approval ratings in the state and is currently at 19%, which is also slightly lower than what we found this January. Among likely voters, approval ratings for the US Congress is even lower at 9%, which is the same as the low reached in December 2013. We asked about the national mood and economic outlook as well, in addition to asking these questions for the state level, and find that 39% of Californians think things in the country are going in the right direction, and 45% expect good economic times for the nation. Comparing the mood and economic outlook of the state versus the nation, we find that the economic outlook for the state and the nation is very similar, but Californians are slightly more negative about the direction of the country than they are of the state. So this year there has been much improvements in how federal officials have handled the budget and deficit issues. In January, federal officials agreed on a spending plan, and in February they raised the debt limit without any condition, which ended a long period of brinkmanship, especially in 2013 when there was much debate and discussion among federal officials leading to government shutdown. But we find that perceptions of how elected officials are handling the deficit and the debt ceiling has not improved, with Californians being critical of both President Obama and the Republicans in Congress. 41% approve of the president in this dimension, and 21% approve of the Republicans in Congress, which is very similar to what we found in the later half of last year. And in fact, for President Obama, this is the lowest level of approval that we have found for his handling of the deficit and the debt ceiling. So another deadline that is approaching is for signing up for health insurance, and we find that Californians' overall views on the healthcare reform has largely remained the same over the last few surveys. 47% say that they have generally favorable views of the healthcare reform law, and 45% say that they have generally unfavorable opinions of the healthcare reform law. There are great partisan divisions, with 63% of Democrats having a generally favorable view and 77% of Republicans having a generally unfavorable view about the healthcare reform law. Independents are divided, as are the uninsured Californians that we surveyed. So in a new question, we asked about what Californians felt the long-term effects of the healthcare reform law would be on them and their family, and find that about a third say that it will have a good effect, and another third say that it won't make much of a difference, and about a quarter say that it will have bad effects in the long run for themselves and their family. We also looked at whether the uninsured adults would sign up for insurance by the end of the deadline, and a strong majority say that they will obtain insurance by the end of the month. We looking at two key groups, Latinos and younger Californians. We find that the Latinos that we surveyed and Californians aged 18 to 44, among these two groups, also over 7 in 10 say that they will sign up for health insurance. Next, we looked at an area where there hasn't been much work done at the federal level, which is immigration reform. And we find that when asked about views of immigrants in California, 65%, which is a record high in our surveys, say that immigrants are a benefit to the state because of their hard work and job skills rather than being a burden on the state. So when we first asked this question in 1998, Californians were as likely to say that immigrants are a burden as to say that they are a benefit. But since then, majorities have said that immigrants are a benefit to the state, and in surveys conducted in 2013, over 6 in 10 held this view. So with such positive views on the impact of immigrants in California, we also found that support for a path to citizenship for illegal immigrants is very high at 86%. We read a brief description of a proposal where illegal immigrants would have a path to citizenship if certain conditions, such as completing a waiting period, paying back taxes, and doing background checks and learning English would be covered. And 86% of adults, including 7 in 10 across parties, say that they favor this proposal. The elements that we covered in this question are also some of the points covered in the Senate bill that passed last June, but there hasn't been much work done on this issue since then. Next, I will present findings on some social issues covered in our survey. Looking at income inequality in the US, 7 in 10 say that the gap between the rich and the poor is growing larger, and 2 in 10 say that it's stayed the same, and only 3% say that it is getting smaller. And on the question of who has the opportunity to get ahead in the long run in today's economy, Californians are divided, with 49% saying that everyone has a chance to get ahead, and 47% saying that it's just a few at the top who have the opportunity. Next, we looked at what the government's role should be in reducing inequality, and find that 6 in 10 Californians say that the government should be doing more to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. Californians are more likely than adults nationwide to prefer government involvement in reducing inequality. In a CBS News poll in January, adults nationwide were divided, with 49% saying that the government should do more, and 45% saying that this is not something that the government should be doing. Lastly, I will present findings on the government's role in 4 issues that we have been tracking over time. So starting with abortion, we find that strong majorities of Californians and an even higher share of likely voters say that the government should not interfere with a woman's access to abortion. Since asking this question in 2000, we have found that majorities of adults and likely voters saying that the government should not interfere with access. On the issue of environmental trade-offs, 55% say that stricter environmental laws and regulations are worth the cost, and 38% say that they cost too many jobs and hurt the economy. And in the past, except in March 2012 when residents were divided, majorities have always said that stricter environmental regulations are worth the cost. There are strong partisan divisions, with 7 in 10 Democrats saying that stricter environmental laws are worth the cost, and a similar share of Republicans saying that they hurt the economy. So gun regulations continue to be discussed at the state, local, and national level, and in the courts as well. And we find that 56% of Californians say that the government does not do enough to regulate access to guns, and 37% say that it goes too far in restricting the rights of citizens to own guns. 3 in 4 Democrats say that the government does not do enough in this area, and 2 in 3 Republicans say that the government goes too far. We find that majorities across regions and demographic groups saying the government does not do enough to regulate access to guns, with the exceptions being whites, those with some college education, and Inland Empire residents, among whom views are divided. Lastly, as proponents of marijuana legalization look to place another ballot measure, where do Californians stand on this issue? We find that they are closely split, with 49% saying it should be legal and 47% saying it should not be legal. So last September, for the first time, a majority of adults said that marijuana use should be made legal. And in earlier surveys, including those leading up to the 2010 election that featured a ballot measure to legalize marijuana, Californians have been split or slightly towards considering saying that it should be made illegal. Today we find slightly higher support for legalization among likely voters, and in the past as well, likely voters showed slightly higher levels of support than all adults. Majorities of Californians age 18 to 34 say it should be made legal, and we find that Californians age 55 and older are less likely to say that it should not be made legal compared to those in the 35 to 54 age group. So in conclusion, some of the key findings for this survey is that the approval of Governor Brown as well as the legislature has declined since January. There has been an increase in the share of Californians naming drought and water as the topmost issue for the state, and 50% of likely voters support the water bond. 6 in 10 say that they pay more in taxes than they should. And views on healthcare reform has largely remained unchanged. A record high share say that immigrants are a benefit to the state, and 6 in 10 say that the government should do more to reduce income inequality, and Californians are currently divided on marijuana legalization. So once again, I would like to thank you all for joining us today, and next Dave will join us to share some of his thoughts on the survey, after which we will answer any questions that you have about these findings.
Thank you very much, Jui. But just a couple of quick comments before we get to questions. This is where I'm a former LA Times political writer, so I put on my analysis hat for a couple thoughts. But there's a bit of the environment going into an election year that you can see in this poll that I think is very interesting. On the one hand, we know we're compared to recent years, where you have a budget surplus, things are good. The governor obviously is way ahead of the opponents in the race. But on the other hand, the environment among voters is the right track, wrong track is at 39%. The anxiety about bad times ahead is almost half the population. What was the other one I was thinking of? Oh, the jobs in the economy continues to be very high, the highest category of interest for people. So there's still a lot of anxiety in the electorate. Also, the governor's poll ratings, his favorability rating, has never been very strong. It's always been almost always between 40 and 50%, and now he's at 49. And it's interesting that, Obama at about his lowest is still higher than our governor at about, as good of a situation as he's ever had in this term. Obama's at 52 and the governor at 49. And if you look at the crosstabs, the difference is really among Democrats. Brown only gets about 2/3 of the Democrats to have a favorability rating. I forget what Obama is in this one, but he's usually around 80%. And one other quick thought, obviously there's a lot of attention turning toward water, a lot more attention turning toward water, and it says a lot about the issue that it can get 50% support for an $11 billion bond with that kind of anxiety that's still in the electorate. One of the things that stuck out to me in the crosstab was that it's really the Central Valley, the interest is highest, and that the support for the bond is actually higher in the Central Valley than it is in the Bay Area, which is for a spending measure, and one especially this big is not very common to see that kind of a difference. You know, and it does pose, it shows how politically difficult it will be for the legislature to really navigate this terrain, because when you lower the cost of the bond, a lot of that money is from the surface storage that's in the Central Valley. So, you know, it's hard to lower it without losing support, but it's also, as the poll shows, it goes up if it's a little less. The support goes up if it's a little less. So, just a couple quick thoughts before we open it up to questions. So, and I'm going to try and repeat the questions so we can pick it up on broadcast. Yes.
I was fascinated to see that I think it was 55 and older was more supportive of marijuana legalization than the 35 to 50 or whatever. And I was just wondering if there are any ideas on why that would be.
So the question is about the support for marijuana legalization being more popular among 55 and older, and why that might be. It's a good question. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts, Jui?
It could be, we were also surprised by those findings, and thought it was interesting. It could just be that they have followed this issue over the years more than younger Californians, and it could also be something to do with having kids at home. And I don't have the exact number on me right now, but I can share you the results for those who say they have children 18 and younger at home.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
On the same matter, I think I've talked to Mark in the past. There's a continuity of the question. So in general, it's a very sparkling question. It's not, do you believe that marijuana should be regulated and taxed, which of course would be any ballot measure. That would be the indicator that would be looked at. It's just, in general, it should be legal. So it's very ambiguous. So it speaks to parents' fears. It's not, do you think it should be regulated and access should be controlled and not available to those under 21, which of course is a different question and it'll have different numbers.
Right. So the comment is about how this question is asked, and it's not. It doesn't have some of the issues that come up in a ballot measure. I mean, we usually, if there is a ballot measure on the ballot, we tend to ask what exactly voters will be asked. Since there's nothing on the ballot now, it's just kind of to get that general impression in the electorate.
Yes, Dave I was just going to say what Dave mentioned, and also we try to, even when it's not on the ballot for key social issues, we try to keep on asking at least the same general question, so that we have some idea of what happened between years. And so we may lose the ability to ask something more specific, but at least we have something on what people said about marijuana for that time period.
Yes.
Regarding the marijuana question, two questions. One, do you have a breakdown by political affiliation? And two, have you asked this question in the past, and how has support trended over the last few years?
Okay, I can get you the...
So the question is about the marijuana finding and the political breakdown and the trend over years. It is definitely trending more favorable.
So for the party finding, 57% of Democrats and 60% of independents say that it should be legal, and among Republicans, 35% say it should be legal and 62% not legal. And for those with children 18 and younger, 45% say it should be legal and 53% say it should not be legal. And what was the other?
Over time.
So over time, last year was the first time that there was a slight majority support among all adults. And before that, in the 2 years before that, there was a very slight, slightly more adults were saying that it should be made, it should not be legal. But In 2010, we had 2 surveys leading up to the election when there was a ballot measure for marijuana, and in that time, we saw that Californians were split as they are today. And we do have, on our website today, we do have a time trend chart for this among likely voters and adults that you can look at. And interestingly, among likely voters, support has always been slightly higher than among all adults for this question.
Yes.
My question's in regards to the legislative approval numbers, which is an indicator that is mostly driven by headlines. And we know that we always see a spike in their approval ratings because of the recess high in January. And what I was looking for in this survey was a pretty precipitous drop in their approval ratings because of the scandals that have been happening in the press. But the drop seems to be in a predictable level within the historical trend between January and March. Of course, this was taken before yesterday's big announcement.
Yes.
So maybe third time's a charm. But did you see the same thing? Notice the same thing, that the drop seems to be predictable, and that the previous scandals of California rights did not really sort of dent and the approval ratings?
So the question just is about the approval rating for the legislature and whether it's been affected by recent scandals, and why there hasn't been a precipitous drop that we've seen yet. Just one thought. Most of this is all in Los Angeles. It's probably getting the most attention regionally, and I don't know how much it's getting statewide. Just one thought, and obviously this third one hasn't registered yet. But I don't know. Do you?
That is certainly an interesting trend. At least just over the last 2 years, we've always found that in January it's slightly higher, and by March it goes down a little bit. It could be also driven by how Californians feel about their own local legislatures, representing them in the legislature. Whenever we ask about the approval ratings for their own state legislature, it's always higher than that of the legislature, and Californians are generally approving of their own legislature. So that might explain why there aren't huge drops, but we can see that it's still a very negative trend.
It's much better than it was at their lowest, though.
Yeah.
Right?
And definitely better than Congress. There isn't anyone who does worse than Congress.
Yeah. And other questions? No? Well, thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you, Jui.